very good evening to you. Welcome to Politics 101. First evening, coming down to the end of the week, end of the work week. Those of us who do the 9 to 5 stuff, welcome down to Politics 101. Welcoming you for you joining us from Guyana. We were looking at some data and lots of people joining from Georgetown. We saw lots of people from Linden, Buxton, Bedford-Wacton, lots of people from those centers joining our platform. Want to welcome you. Lots of people from Brooklyn, New York, joining us. So a very good evening to you. A very good evening to you. Lots of people from Barbados joining us. And I know lots of people are joining us from across the world. Last night we had quite a show, trying to make sense of our politics and where it has been and where we are going as a country. Good evening to you, Roxanne, Joy, and of course, from there in Barbados, joining us. Yvonne Henry. Welcome down to Politics 101. Deborah, good evening, Glenford. Cheryl, Glenn, my villager, Lynette Fraser. Welcome down to Politics 101. Orin Barker, welcome. Welcome down to Politics. Cheryl is saying that she's in Buxton. Well, you know, I envy you, girl, you know. Mark is joining us. Mark Vigilance is joining us from DC, one of my homes. That's where my brothers and sisters and my mom, who's still alive, that's where they reside, in Washington, DC, Maryland area. And of course, Derek is joining us from St. Kitts, Nevis, but particular in St. Kitts. We haven't seen Ernest for a long time, and I notice he's here tonight. Ernest Elliott from Golden Grove in the Backlist, Haslington area. Of course, Ernest, former parliamentarian, long-standing member of the PNC. And when you talk about PNC in Golden Grove, in the Backlist, Ernest Elliott's name is synonymous with that. And Ernest is always threatening that he would retire and leave it to the young people. But, you know, this politics thing, you don't retire. You may retire from office, but not from activism. Good evening, Denise Booker. Good evening, and how are you? Linda Campbell, watching, I assume, from New Jersey, Cookie, Buxton, Bagdam side. Good evening, Gladys. Good evening, Gladys. I haven't seen you for a couple of days. Maybe I've not been looking. I've not been looking, Princess Marcus. Good evening. Good evening. Lots of ladies here tonight. The guys may be checking in later. Orin Arthur, that's my good friend. You have to look good because Orin straddles California and Buxton. So you don't know, he's like me. You don't know where he at sometimes, you know. But good evening, my brother. Orin Arthur, you know. Orin Ferrell, in case you all Buxtonians wondering who's this Orin Arthur. Good evening, everyone, and welcome down to Politics 101. Orin Farrell says that he is in California. And you know, I lived in California for three years, and we lived there together. I taught at Claremont Graduate University in California before I moved to Arizona State. Three of the best years of my life. I had, you know, the West Coast is a country by itself, just as New York is. But if you live in the LA and the suburbs, it's really a different world out there. And the 3 years I spent there were 3 wonderful years of my life. And Orin and I and some other Bostonians and Guyanese. You know, when you're on an island, the family gets closer. Good evening, June, watching from Barbados. June Cameron, and of course, Orin Newton. Is by you, you're still there in Buxton? You now go back. All right. I'll see you in a couple of morning. The man, Mr. Bumba, Orin Newton, Buxton, Friendship Front. Friendship Front. Of all the Newtons are big family in our village there. Good evening to you, Courtney October. Good evening, watching from New York. And I've been seeing Rhonda Spence Tom on in recent time. Good evening, Lauren Ogle, Ralph Fredericks, who is looking at us from Antigua, little Guyana there, you know. You know, Leah should do a straight flight from Antigua to Guyana. I think they'll make good money. You know, if you travel from Antigua to Guyana, you got to island hop, as the Guyanese Antiguans would know, you know. I once traveled from Barbados to Guadeloupe, and it's a 20-hour plane ride, I understand, but it took me 13 hours to travel. Stop in Grenada, stop in Dominica, stop in St. Vincent, stop in Antigua, stop here, stop there. 13 hours later, in a trip that would normally take 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. It's one of the problems of our Caribbean. If we can solve the transportation, air transport, if we can solve air transport, we would solve a lot of our regional integration problems. People move now; they are family, and you know, if you have family in Antigua, you know, you can if you can hop on a plane on Friday afternoon in Guyana, and you know, in an hour you're touched down in Antigua, you know, hour and a half, and then you know, hang out with your friends on your family, you know, on Saturday and Sunday night, you know, you get back to Guyana, spend a weekend. It's going to be good for the economy, economies of the country. People go there, spend money in those places, intra-Caribbean tourism, rather than sometimes people going up to New York and so on. You can go to one of the Caribbean countries and really have a good time. But transportation, it's so difficult. If we can solve that problem of transportation, it'll be very good. Carol Jacobs is joining us from Linden. Beautiful Linden. We're having Sharma Solomon on tonight. He promised to drop by tonight. So for you Lindeners, former chairman of the region, Sharma Solomon, is going to drop by. Pleasance in Pennsylvania in the house. That's Latel. Latel used to give me a lot of blows in the days when I was critical of the coalition government. God, Latel used to give it to me. That is from Pleasance, Pennsylvania, in the house. close. Yeah. Look, there's some brothers and sisters who are really diehard. I mean, diehard PNC. And, I used to get a lot of hell when I was critical. But the point is that, we take it in good spirit. In the days when Sharon McCrae is from Antigua. I wonder if McCrae from Buxton. Our good friend, we have some of the McCraes there. I mean, there in Antigua. But I was saying that, in the days when the WPA and the PNC were at each other's throat, I'm talking about the 70s and the early 80s. And of course, Buxton was a place where we went at each other. But we never stopped being friends. My PNC, we would confront each other politically, both sides, but we were friends. We never stopped being friends. We hung out together, we went to parties together, and we weren't enemies. We disagreed politically, and it's one of the things that I've learned from growing up in Buxton, and that is you disagree politically, but we were all Buxtonians. And it's one of the values I learned from growing up in that village and cutting my teeth politically there. I learned never to hate people because they do not share my politics, and it's one of the things that I think we can learn, we can teach other places, and that is other communities, that political disagreement is political disagreement. Good evening, Mr. Vibert White from Grove on the East Bank. I have to, because Golden Grove, you get East Bank Golden Grove, you get West Bobby's Golden Grove, of course you got East Coast Golden Grove, and they were telling me there's a Golden Grove somewhere in the Essequibo too. Our history is full of it. But yes, that value of disagreeing politically, but respecting people's humanity is something, and I have to credit UC Kwayana for that. He instilled that in us, right? And my friends in the PNC, and so for them, my brothers and sisters, and I think if we can get to that place, perhaps we can build this one nation that we are talking about. Note, I'm not saying one Guyana, because we be fooling ourselves. Guyana is a land of many peoples, and we can come together and we can see what is it we have in common. What is it we have in common? That's where you begin to build nations. And you can only know what you have in common through struggle, through engagement. That is when you find your commonality. You can't impose commonality. You can't give people tickets, share a ticket to go to a cricket match. And then when the people go to the cricket match, you say, look, black people and Indian people, the cricket match waving flag. That is one Guyana. What the PPP was trying to do with the CPL is to politicize the CPL. They were using the CPL to advance their political agenda. That is, to use the CPL as a mask for domination, as a mask for domination. That is what was happening there, you see. And what do they know of cricket? Who on the cricket knows? CLR James, the preeminent cricket theorist. Cricket is something bigger than political party and partisan politics. James's book, Beyond the Boundary, which I recommend to young curious people. It is a book that established the link between cricket and society, cricket and nation. And our cricket in the West Indies has always been about standing up against colonial domination, standing up against imperialist domination, saying to the world we are the smallest and poorest cricketing nation. But we ruled the cricketing world for 20 years, the longest any team, any region of the world has ruled a team sport. 20 long years. The poorest cricketing nation, the smallest population. And we do that. And James and theories such as Tim Hector and laterally Sir Hilary Beckles, they have tried to explain that. And the point is that the cricket field became an arena of contestation between the formerly colonized and enslaved against their enslavers. And we are saying to the world on the cricket field that when the rules are the same, and when the playing field is level, we are equal human beings. That's what we West Indians use cricket for. When it comes to our racial problems, cricket has not been able to help us. A few years ago, one of the Indianist organizations actually held a cricket match with Indian cricketers. I think there was some controversy. I can't remember whether Chandrapal played and Sarwan. I can't remember. There was some controversy. Maybe I think one of them played, but I can't remember. I'll have to go back and resort. It was a group called, I think, GIHA, the Ravidev Ryan Shaw people, and they wanted a cricket match among Indians to celebrate Indian arrival. That they played a cricket match and they invited cricketers to do. There was some controversy. I didn't have a problem with it because I think people have a right to express themselves ethnically. The fact of the matter, don't tell me in 2022, some or the other, you discover that cricket can bring the nation together. Then you might have used cricket to push the nations, the ethnic groups apart. I mentioned that when I, in the 70s and the 80s, would go to cricket matches when India and Pakistan visited the West Indies. Our Indian Guyanese sisters and brothers supported those teams. When South Africa came in the 90s, and Makaya Ntini was the lone player, he was one of the South African fast bowlers. I remember African Guyanese supporting Ntini, not the South African team, right? So one has to raise these things to educate our people about what the con that these people are trying to do. All of a sudden, they discovered that cricket can bring us together. All of a sudden, they never believed in that all the time. You know, the Indian Guyanese community and Indian Trinidadian community came down hard on Vivian Richards because he, I think he said the West Indies cricket team and the achievement of Black people. And I'm sure Viv was not speaking about just Afro-Caribbean people, because as many Indian Guyanese say, when they go to places like New York and Europe, we are all Black. And Viv was expressing that sentiment. Indo-Guyanese leaders went after him with a vengeance. I mean, I don't know that Viv Richards, I don't know Viv Richards to be a racist person. But the point I am making is that don't tell me in 2022 you suddenly discover that cricket can bring us together. Cricket, yes, can offer us a space where we can celebrate together, offer us a space away from politics. It has the potential of doing that. Good evening, my brother Albert Morgan, forever, from number 51, on the quarantine. On the quarantine. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Look, look, if ever you all black people descend yourself to the position that some of these people have descended to, I will have a serious problem, right? Look. Good night, cousin monkey. That's what they think about us, and yet these people, putting it there for the world to see. If ever black people describe Indian people in such ways, I will have a serious problem. But these chaps come on to these programs and they have no compunctions. And then they call us the racists. Us the racists. I've gone to one or two programs that are hosted by pro-PPP people. And, there are some black viewers who would chat back. But I've never seen black people describe Indian in this way in recent times or so. But yet these guys are comfortable doing it, calling us monkeys and all that. And then, their leaders don't tell them to stop it. I want Indian leaders to tell these Indian brothers and sisters, that is not something you do. That is not something you do and then tell us about one Guyana. If it were isolated, if what they're saying here was isolated, one can dismiss it, but it's not isolated. You go on a lot of these platforms, a lot of these shows, and that's what these chaps do. Women do it sometimes, but they're mostly men. They're mostly men. We are bigger than that. We are more sophisticated than that. We're not saying that we are, and I am not saying that we are saints, that we are not prejudiced. Yes, there is prejudice within our community. But I'm saying if you come on to this program and do that, I am going to call you out. But the Indian leadership does not call out. They do not call out these people. Thank you. Good evening. Carl is saying cricket is a common thread that bonds our cultural identity throughout the Caribbean. It's an outlet to let go of stress, depression. I agree with you, Carl. I agree with you. It's a tool of anti-domination, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism. Cricket has given us in the Caribbean an identity. And in terms of our ethnically divided society, it allows us that space where we can sit with each other and try to understand each other. The first Indian Caribbean cricketer to play for the West Indies was Sonny Ramadan in 1950 in England. Bowling alongside Alfred Valentine from Jamaica, those two pals of mine. And Ramadan paved the way for Kanai and Solomon, and Kalicharan, Timur Mohammed, Farouk Bacchus, and closer to our time, Chandapal and Sarwan. Ramadan leading the way. And what is happening in 1950? In 1950, we're about to throw off the yoke of colonialism. Freedom is coming. As we are beating England in England for the first time in 1950, reggae is born. Reggae is born at that time in the early 50s in the form of ska. It emerges in Jamaica at the same time in the early 50s. So we are discovering our Caribbean identity in the early 50s as Britain is going, as Sparrow would later say, London Bridge is falling. As London Bridge is falling, Caribbean identity is being formed. It's being formed on the cricket field. The mighty Sparrow would emerge in 1956, the undisputed Calypso king of the world. All of this is in the 50s as freedom is coming. And in 1958, the West Indies Federation is formed with 10 Caribbean countries. And as I've said over and over on this program, the PPP refused to take Guyana into the Federation because the PPP argued Indians would become second-class citizens in the Caribbean. So what are you now talking about West Indian nationhood? Martin Carton, Sidney King, and Rory Westmus and others left the PPP. They didn't leave it, Burnham. They left in 1956 after Dr. Jagan refused to take Guyana into the West Indian nation. That is what forced Sidney King. Sidney King would make a famous statement that the leadership of the PPP has lost confidence in the African executives of the party. That was a second split in the PPP over the question of federation. And we have to say these things so that we can educate ourselves. Now people change. The PPP can argue that we took an anti-Caribbean position then and we are pro-Caribbean now. But for my study, what has happened is that whenever the Caribbean is on the side of the PPP, they become integrationists. Whatever you say about Burnham, Burnham was an integrationist. He never wavered from that. The CARICOM headquarters is in Guyana. CARIFESTA was first held in Guyana. Burnham and Bradshaw and Barrow explored the possibility of one country in the 1960s. Burnham was there when CARIFTA, Guyana was part of CARIFTA. And the Treaty of Chaguaramas in 1973 was signed by Burnham, Errol Barrow, Eric Williams, and Michael Manley. Integrationists. I don't think Dr. Jagan and the PPP were into integration in the same way. They saw integration as an African club. That's how they saw CARICOM. And saying these things for the younger people to understand the evolution, and to when these people come saying they love CARICOM, you're either an integrationist or you're not. You're not. But anyhow, Chalmers Solomon is here with us. Chalmers Solomon is here with us. Good evening, my brother.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Hines. Good evening to you and your wonderful audience. Always a pleasure to be with you. How are you doing, sir?
I'm rolling with the punches. When you've been in the trend so long, you just get bit on your skin, and I don't know. You all enough to bathe the trench, where you all used to bathe at Riff and Creek in Linden, but you got Golden Grove ties and so on. You know when you bathe the trench, when you come out, you get on your skin. You gotta go home and bathe, and your night your skin shine to get rid of that thing. Well, I roll in the trenches. I'm out, bathe my skin, ninth up, and ready to go back in the next day.
Well, as a good old country boy, Dr. Hines, as a good old country boy, I know what you're talking about. You know,
Oh,
I had no moments, and I cherish those moments because it makes you as tough as you need to be in these times that you have to.
yes. When you come out of the trench, you are red, really cold like and your skin white, and you go home and you bathe off and you ninth up and you gone back the next day. That's
Yes,
what struggle is all about. That's what life is all about. The listeners
certainly.
asked for you to come on. I don't know why. And Kidaki showed me some numbers yesterday, I think. And the third largest, the largest viewership of this program is Georgetown. The second largest is Brooklyn, New York. The third largest is Buxton for obvious reasons. And then Linden, Linden is there, a critical mass. Therefore, Wackton, Plaisance, Barbados, Antigua were very high up there in the numbers. But Lindeners last week said, I have to bring on Sharon, hear me, Sharon, Sharma Solomon. Sharon, I'm not going to thief your time tonight. Don't start. Right? Sharma, what have you been doing that the people of Linden are eager for you to tell the rest of us?
Um, like you, Doc, and let me start by saying, this struggle is always on, and we have always identified with the struggle. We have always identified with the things that are to make our nation a better place, which is to ensure that we struggle against those things. I have taken the opportunity, as early as the year started, to do a lot of these programs, and we were engaging many different audience on different topics. I really wanted persons to understand the issue, especially while I was on earlier on the issue of good governance, and I made an entire series of that. But as a political animal, you put it that way, it is always important to bump fists and kiss babies, the way we put it. So you have to get back on the ground. And of recent, that is where I found myself moving around in the communities, engaging individuals, meeting people, having a deep appreciation of the things that are really affecting Guyanese. And I can say to you, Dr. Hines, in many of the matters that we hear being discussed on a national level, for example, if we're in an apartheid state, for example, if we see inequality to the extent where we should be concerned, those things become deeply appreciated when you actually engage individuals and you draw from them their personal experiences. And I believe that puts into context many of the issues that you sometimes are discussing, and it becomes real what Guyanese are actually going through. So I've taken the time to engage, to be back into the communities, and to ground, if you put it that way, with our brethren and sisters in that times.
Very good to hear that. It's the kind of politics that I myself am in love with and weaned on it, the big crowds of the thousands and the bright lights and the media there and so on to report what you say in the morning. Those things are essential. But when you go and you can say, look people eyeball to eyeball and listen to them and listen to their emotions, because you're going beyond the voice.
Yes.
and you are looking into their eyes and their faces. It brings a human
It is.
element to the politics that
Mhm.
is not there when you're speaking to 10,000, 5,000,
It
because you're
helps.
looking at
It
human
helps to better
beings.
articulate. Yeah, it helps you to better articulate. You see tears. You see raw emotions. You actually witness
We seem to we seem to have lost brother. We seem to have lost our brother there for a minute. Um, it seems as though there is some technological challenges there. He will be back on shortly. He seemed to frozen. Um, and we hope he comes back. But he's been telling us that he's been moving around the community and in Linden and talking to people, you know, political political activists. Um, don't always do that kind of work. And I would say it has worked against us. It's good to see Aubrey Norton, the leader of the PNC, going in to the communities and meeting with people. It's a departure from the kind of leadership that we saw from the big party. And it's good that he's doing that. And I think Brother Sharma is back. Go ahead, brother. Continue
Right.
from where you left off.
Sorry about that, Doc. I was just making the point of the very important uh, issue of being grounded. Um, our politics has always been one to connect with people. The experience that we acquired over the past 10 years, especially in the active politics that we participated in, show that for you to articulate the issues that are really affecting people, for them to gravitate to what you're saying, you have to really be grounded in the issues that are affecting them. So um, you cannot only say people are suffering if you really don't see the tears of a mother who is with 3 children to send to school in the morning and having the experience of what it takes for her to make that possible. You cannot articulate clearly on behalf of issues such as inequality of, for example, land distribution and housing, if you don't see the type of trauma squatters or people who are desperate for house are facing when their homes are being bulldozed by the government or they're not being compensated like others are when their homes are being taken away. So you have to many times just go down, hear what people are saying, and then start to formulate the sort of solutions that are needed to take care of the issues affecting people.
And of course, politics are both local and national. And one of the things about Guyanese people across the political divide is our ability to link the local with the national. It is something that uh, Guyanese are very adept at. What are some of the challenges? You've talked about bulldozing houses and distribution of resources, but what are the clear and present challenges that are facing the people of Linden right now? What are the two, three clear and present challenges?
Obviously, cost of living. Cost of living is on top of the list for everyone, and that is compounded with the ability to have jobs to match where people now have an increase in the demands. So you would see the PPP government saying, for example, we're going to give you a 360 million Bamia primary school, and we're going to ensure that that provides for you employment. And after 7, 8 months and 70 million being spent, there is no work being done. You'll hear about a Linden to Mabura road being constructed and the sort of employment given, is not one where people from Linden could enjoy what was expected in terms of job creation. So much with the issue of high cost of living and compounded with the issue of lack of jobs and the providence so that people can be able to have the sort of resources convenient to them. So I'll give you this. In the area of agriculture, for example, while the bulldozing was taking place of homes, many of those farmers had their lands knocked down and have not been compensated. So you're compounding cost of living by removing the persons who produce food for this community at cheap costs and not compensating them. So right away, you're increasing food production and not looking after the issue of food security. So those are some of the things that are affecting the community and really putting a bear on people as it relates to their ability to provide for themselves and family. And I believe, as you pointed out sometimes on your program on, is this systemic in its approach? We are convinced that based on what you see, one cannot avoid by saying it is indeed systemic in the approach.
And of course, the systemic nature of the problem, because if you were to talk to people in Victoria or Denhamstel or Queenstown in their Sequibble or number 51 out there in the quarantine Manchester, you would hear the same kinds of complaints, you know. And these are different communities in some regards. Linden is a former mining town. There's a kind of socialization of the working class at Linden that is not necessarily there in an agricultural place, like let's say 51, where a lot of people would have been into rice, planting, and so on. You know, villages closer to Portland, like Buxton and Pleasance, where you have a lot of civil servants, public servants, living teachers, and so on. So you, although they're the same ethnic group, they're located differently in the economy, yet their problems, their complaints are similar. And in that sense, the systemic analysis, all right, because a system is a coming together of institutions, all right, and that is what creates the system. So you have the mining institutions, the mining aspects of the economy there in Linden, and you have public service, public servants in Pleasance, you have farmers in number 51, and yet their complaints are the same. And that's how we are able. You see, Chama, a lot of times, and some of our own people do it. You know, they say, look, we got to have data. And I don't mind. I mean, you were in university in more recent times than me, and you would have had to do all the courses and so on. But there is a way in which you can demonstrate these things both with data, but also by studying the systems and the institutions.
Yes, go ahead. But Doc, let me say this. You know, there is indeed a way you can verify the functionality of the system, whether you take certain methodology of quantitative or qualitative approach to verify. However, Doc, what we see to convince us that there is dysfunctionality in the system is that history is repeating itself. And I'll give you this. I'll give you this at the point of the village movement and what we saw as a system designed to ensure a certain people remain in a certain way, in subordination, for example. And it did, for example, when we, 6 years after 1838, and we got lands, we were denied the opportunity to expand further villages, which was in itself a means of generational wealth to pass on. Today, the system continues to deny Afro-Guyanese, and we saw at the advent of this government, when they went after the likes of Lincoln Lewis, when they went after the likes of Afro-Guyanese that acquired lands, and we still see that. In last week, one of the donor agency complaining, Afro-Guyanese out of Atlanta, that the government is repossessing lands. Even for those squatters, in different villages, the treatment is different. For Mocha, for example, for Linden, for example, in Rumville, for example, squatters are being removed and not being adequately compensated. So the issue of land in a systemic way is history repeating itself. The second thing deals with the establishment of a class of people where the system is so broken that we can give people $360 million. We can do offshore, we can do oil blocks, we can do licensing. Like in the days of right after the village movement, it was the Portuguese class that was given license to merchant in Black communities, refusing Afro-Guyanese the opportunity of those licenses to empower themselves. Today we see just that. Contracts not being given to Afro-Guyanese on a large scale level. No oil block is owned by any consortium or Afro-Guyanese. We see the sort of economic development in itself not geared to ensure that Afro-Guyanese become empowered as we were in the time gone by. So history is repeating itself. And the third thing we see is the establishment of classism, even internal to the civil service. So the first thing the government did in 2020 was purge the civil service, purge public servants, so that they can reestablish the same way the Crown did right after we did the village movement, was to ensure that the furthest Afro-Guyanese could have aspired was within the civil service to become some big boy or big girl. That attitude remains because of that purging in 2020 and where we see the civil service now. So there is nothing new in terms of the systemic approach to what we see obtained at that point of where Afro-Guyanese move towards self-determination. We're being stymied as we see today in this new economic independence that Guyana is on, and Afro-Guyanese development once again continues to be stymied.
My brother Shama Solomon here doing some historical analysis, comparative analysis, and it's important because sometimes people tell us, don't look back, look forward. Well, you have to look forward. But as you look forward, you are carrying everything behind you. And you cannot let go of your history. Our brother Marcus Garvey made that very clear. People without a history are like a boat without a rudder. and in making that historical analysis, in saying that what obtained in the immediate post-emancipation era, the barriers that were put against the development of African people, and the same barriers that are up today, in different guise. The recurring element there is that this economic and political system are being used as barriers against development of one group. Good evening from our sister Donna in French Guyana. Brother Coffee, I miss you for a couple of days, and I'm glad you're back, you're listening. I know you will have a lot to say. And I know Sham is one of your boys that you, Coffee's a high pass master. But he like you. He's, brother, I think he's from West Coast. He's a West Coast man, come out from Stroudville around that area and thing. And they're bad there, you know, because the people in Stroudville and then Amstel and so on, they work at the sugar estate there at Enora and Iflat, you know, so they're into sugar in a way that not all the more rural African Guyanese are, but they're very steeped in that kind of working class ethic. And yeah, I used to wonder, Shama, when I was a small boy, in Buxton there. And the WPA would come and hold meetings. We young boys, since you hear Walter Rodney come in and Rupert Ryan and thing, you stop play cricket early and you garner the line top. And when Clive Thomas come in, we used to say, let the cricket go on a little later. But the farmers would come out half day from back down and they're the line before the meeting. And until I got older, I realized that Clive Thomas was talking sugar economics.
Certainly.
And these were people who plant what they call farmer cane. At the back, they used to plant cane and sell to the estate. And so there is a way in which communities are socialized. And Walter Rodney, of course, referred to Linden as the cradle of the revolution, because in Marxist terms, if there is a real, genuine industrial working class, it was there at Linden. I've been hearing about protests against the imposition of an IMC there. Bring us up to date on what's happening there.
I had the opportunity a couple of days ago to speak to some of the workers over there, not as someone who attended the protest. These days, as I said, it's important to gather information, to speak to persons, to have a full appreciation of what is happening. And it was good to hear from them. And their contention remains two very important things. First, the imposition itself. This is a members society. It is one of the oldest in Guyana. It is the largest owned, or one of the largest owned by Afro-Guyanese in this country. And the members had no say in the outcome as it relates to those who are now managing the affairs of the society. That's the first contention. So they've taken away the rights from the members. And for those who understand the issue of electricity generation, and more so coming through the co-op society, it has always been a contentious issue to exclude the members from the say of their society. So that is the first thing to fix. The members would like to have back control of their society and to have a say as to those who are going to manage their affairs. Secondly, the persons who are identified to then be in charge of the society on behalf of the government through this imposition of an IMC are not acting on behalf of and in the best interest of the members. And as such, the employees have started a strike action. What is, as I know, as of Monday, is that they're trying to elevate that now to a general members, which is to bring the community into the strike action, which is unfortunate that after many days, the government have not seen it fit to even intervene after creating the situation they have to bring some resolution to this issue. So that is as far as I know of the matter, but I can say to you, Dr. Hines, in visiting many of the communities that we have met with persons, that persons are very concerned, are prepared to take action to ensure that they save their society and to ensure that government do not creep in from the back door that they are seeing obvious with the imposition of an IMC and the reluctance of the government to do anything as it relates to fix the issues affecting the society at the moment.
And so the people there at Linden are pushing back small protests. Sometimes we don't hear about them, but people sometimes have to do things in their own particular environment. And
this has been going on for quite some days now, Doc. So I'm glad you mentioned small, but people have been protesting for the past several weeks now.
Yes, it was brought to my attention last week, and I wanted to speak to somebody from Linden and what's going on there. Shama, GCOM, it's a hotbed there. A lot has happened since 2020. At the end of the day, there's a call by the opposition for a completely new voters list. Where do you stand on that?
I absolutely agree with that, Doc. I like to look at what precedents were set. History allows for you to do that. I always go back to, and this was one of the principal area in the research that I did my final year research in terms of, as it obtained in the 90s, the sort of collective approach to ensure that first, even as not is being requested now, but so serious it was that we had the movement of election from 90 to 92 first. We had a new voters list. We had things like counting at the place of poll. We had an entire transformation of what the electoral process looked like then, because we had a collective approach of that intersection where international relations merge with domestic issues. I believe this is where we have to up that in terms of our international partners. They ensured then that we had this sort of electoral outcome through the Carter Centers and others. They must ensure now, as they have been making those claims since 2020, whether it is all those observers that you must have, and even the PPP were making that claim, a new voters list. And I believe the opposition should not move 1 inch and find ways to get people not only on the domestic front, but as I said, on the international arena, to know that it is absolutely necessary that whether it's local government or a general election, we must have a new voters list.
We must have a new voters list, because without a new voters list, we cannot speak about free and credible and fair elections that are free from fear. 2020 election, from everything that we've seen that came out of the recall. Yes.
The latest report from the IRI noted just that persons in the upper 70 percentile recognize that the electoral process is one not to be trusted. So Guyanese don't have confidence in the process to move ahead with a process where so many Guyanese, from an agency of repetition of such, expressed their dissatisfaction, their lack of confidence in, then it would be insane for you to proceed knowing the outcome will be of questionable in terms of its integrity, and create this sort of dispute that we see even today as it relates to petition before the court and the issues we see at GCOM at present.
Sharma, let's go back to Linden. There are lots of talk about local content in the oil industry and communities benefiting from it. Is Linden benefiting from the coming of oil?
I don't see where that is. I'll go national, then come back to Linden. If you look at whether it's fisheries, we saw the Minister of Agriculture saying to fishing folks that it's about time for them to start to reorient themselves towards island gas. You see the Agriculture Minister saying to sugar workers, even at Enmore, it's time for them to reorient themselves to island gas. That is dangerous in itself from an economic perspective of how we are orienting our economy. However, you don't see that sort of enthusiasm as it relates to where do you see expansion within Linden as it relates to injecting the resources of island gas. Lindeners are not being given the sort of access. What you see instead is people who are coming from outside. And in the true form of what this PPP government represents, the top down of economics in terms of ensuring people get money, there is no guarantee in that. And this is the dilemma that Linden finds itself in. So, for example, you heard about the 360 million Pamir school. And I saw Starboard News doing a perspective on it from the angle of the system and its failure in procurement and tender. And they also did the perspective of ensuring persons who don't have the necessary compliance getting into the system. But one of the most important perspective that was missed, as you ask, if this injection is seeing its way into Linden, we have 10,000 persons who live in the Amelia's Ward area. That school is being designed for 800 pupils. In the absence of its completion, you're putting a financial burden on over 3,000 persons, of which almost, and this is why it's important to walk the ground, where you see people like a Samantha, who got 3 children, who need to spend money every morning to get them to school, and the decision is made whether I should send them to school or feed them. You have hundreds of parents who are now going to suffer because of the government approach in terms of its development to just give away island gas money to friends and cronies. And that is what is representing island gas spending in Linden. That is what is representing the sort of injection, unlike other communities where you can see training and development for the island gas sector. So instead of bringing that sort of windfall that Isle is bringing so that we can build schools and we can build proper infrastructure, Linden doesn't see that sort of development as other communities.
Linden doesn't see that sort of development as happens in other communities. It's been 10 years, 10 long years. Although sometimes it doesn't seem so long, when you come onto the national stage, leading the struggle there in Linden to keep the subsidy of electricity, which was earned by the people of Linden, given their sacrifices on to make the bauxite industry what it became. And we hear that sugar fed us, yes, but bauxite also fed us in the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, coming right through when the calcined bauxite that we had there in Linden could be found in 3 places, Jamaica, Suriname, and Guyana. There was lots of demand. We got lots of income from that. And Linden also fed Guyana and got a little bit of subsidy from electricity. And the government of the day wanted to take it away from the people of Linden. And the people of Linden said, no. It's been 10 years. Is there still unfinished business from that struggle?
Certainly. The unfinished business is in the agreement. I think what most people miss is that after 32 days of ensuring the fundamental rights of citizens were respected, and it transcended beyond the boundaries of Linden, of Article 13. We see that prevalent even today, that people are now recognizing, even an entire group is called Article 13, of their right to be involved in decisions that will impact and affect their lives. So the unfinished business is in the agreement. The first committee in that agreement to be established was the Electricity Management Committee, which would look at the distribution and the creation of electricity. Now, what was important about that, and not selfish in its design, was that once we had started that, Dr. Hines, outside of knowing the sacrifices Linden made for the rest of Guyana and how the electricity was produced, it was going to be a template that even GPL, with all of its ills today, and every generation of electricity and how it was distributed across Guyana, would have had a template to ensure that Guyanese are not being taken advantage of and that they get value for dollar. Today, we are not seeing that. So that was the first thing that is unfinished, not only for Linden, even though electricity is relatively stable and relatively cheap, because the second thing in that of the management of electricity agreement was that we go back to the status quo that says that Linden is not unwilling, but we are unable to pay the increase of electricity because there've been no economic expansion for over 2 decades. There've been no injection into new resources. So the second thing would have been the establishment of an economic committee that would have taken into consideration the state of the economy, the state of the community, the joblessness that existed, and look to see where we can start to have government to build manufacturing, to build on other infrastructure, so that people can start to create jobs and create that sort of ability to even pay an increase in electricity. And then we had things such as the Land Selection Committee. That point that I made earlier about ensuring we can generate generational wealth. It is because many times people that look like you and I, Doc, are not given the opportunity for proper land ownership. And if we do own it, we are challenged, like Lincoln Lewis and his family, for it to be taken away, like the people in Mocha, like the people in Amelia's Ward, like the people in Rumville. So we wanted a land selection committee. And fourth, our television station, which today, Linden remains with one television station, one area of having the opportunity, which is to have their fundamental right respected, the right to have access to information unimpeded and uninterrupted. So no doubt, our business is far from finished. It is more than unfinished.
And you're hearing it there from the man, along with a woman, Miss Kisoon. Those two names I remember very well, as I used to frequent Linden during the struggle, and saw those two then young people, they're still young, in action. And it is what I call the kind of organic leadership that arises and arose from the bowels of struggle. And I'm going to put Deborah Ann comment on. And Deborah, I share the same view. But you know, they say the political party works in mysterious ways. And sometimes we have to do God's work, not only inside of the church, but we have to go by the wayside. You know, long time they used to call them people wayside preachers. They were as effective as the preachers in the church. But thanks very much for your comment, Deborah. And Sharma, before we go, you want to comment on Deborah Ann's very insight, like Guyanese, you know, the bad insight.
Let me say this. You know, I'll tell you this. Two things, right? Two things.
Yes.
First, on my own part, I refuse to use any additional energy that is so badly needed to get us out of this stage to fight inside.
There you go.
It's absolutely unnecessary. And second to that, we have never won a fight if we never had the ability to come together, even if we go all the way to 64. Whether we go to 2006 with the advent of the AFC coming into parliament, we go to 2011 giving the PPP a minority government. It was a coalition in the parliament that did that. And then we widen it to a wider coalition in 2015. It is irresponsible for anyone to believe that we will continue the way we are if we don't find the means to bring our energies collectively to defeat the PPP. And I strongly believe in that. We cannot expend our energies on the sort of internal issues that distract from the real issues that are affecting us as a nation. We cannot. It will be absolutely irresponsible for us to do that.
And what a positive way.
I refuse to be a part of that irresponsibleness.
Yes. And what a positive way to end tonight. As I said, we do God's work wherever it takes us. If we have to go into the churches, we go there. If we have to go by the wayside and preach the gospel there, we do it. Everyone has a role to play. One of my favorite calypsonians is the brother Valentino. Those of you know your calypso, he sang the famous calypso, Stay Up Zimbabwe. Stay Up Zimbabwe. He has a calypso called Life is a Stage. And all of us are the actors. And when we are faced with big struggle, we need all the actors on stage, not fighting against each other, but presenting a collage for our people to embrace each other as we seek the justice that we richly deserve. Closing thoughts, Sharma.
Thanks for having me on again. I always look forward for the invite. I know you and I had an arrangement last week, so let me apologize that I couldn't fulfill that. But just to say that, it is as important as we have these conversations online and we can really affect the masses. Those very individual, personal, insightful discussions with our residents, with our citizens, I would encourage not only myself to continue, but you and other leaders to get on the ground. Sometimes it is just even an embrace, an embrace. People are crying, just an embrace that it is going to be okay. Though it is so at times seem to be hopeless, it is not as hopeless because we can fix it. And I believe that is very important for us to ensure that we are there to give our people that sort of comforting sort of support. And given the opportunity, I look forward to continue to grow with our brothers and sisters.
And thank you very much. And the audience is tend to give their regards to Sister Vanessa. I have not been bothering her too much because I know she is in school and parenting and working and so on. But Vanessa, if you're listening, give me a shout and say when you are available. Sharma, is always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. From the comments from our audience, clearly you've brought light and freshness as always. Thank you, my brother. And I hope you don't stay away long. All right. And good night to you, my sisters and brothers. Yuvorn. I like the name. It's one Yuvorn I know in my whole life. Is my country girl, Yuvorn Miller. As the only person I know with that name. Now this is the second person. Thank you, Yuvorn, for coming, and please come back. Thank you, everybody. And the weekend is not really for resting, because in politics, there is no rest day. But do take a little time for yourself. Take a little drink. If you drink wine, take a little wine. If you do the other thing, the hard stuff, do it. And so on. Take a little time to wind down, because the struggle goes on. As I always say, we come from the valley of love. Love has brought us this far. Love and faith go hand in hand. Don't hate. Do not hate. Those who hate you, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But don't reciprocate hate with hate. Love is our watchword. See you all next week.